They rigged the trial. They bought the judge. They thought they had Elon Musk cornered. But then boom, one journalist blew the whole thing wide open. Secret bribes, leaked emails, and a courtroom takedown nobody saw coming. Stay locked in, because by the end of this video, you'll see just how deep the corruption goes and why it all backfired spectacularly. Watch till the end. You won't believe how this story ends. Chapter 1. The trial was over before it even started. Elon Musk sat at the defense table, his expression unreadable, fingers drumming lazily against the polished wood. The air in the courtroom was too thick. Something was off. He could feel it. Across the room, Daniel Forsyth, the prosecution's lead attorney, leaned back in his chair with the smug confidence of a man who already knew the ending. That should have been Musk's first clue. Russell Greer, Musk's lawyer, adjusted his tie and exhaled slowly. "I don't like this," he muttered under his breath. Musk barely turned his head. "You don't like what?" "The judge," Greer whispered. "Langford. He's not even trying to hide it." Greer wasn't wrong. From the second the trial started, Judge Bernard Langford had made it painfully clear which side he was on. Every time Forsyth spoke, Langford listened with the patience of a saint. Every time Greer opened his mouth, Langford's gavel came down like a hammer from the gods. Objection? Overruled. Motion to dismiss a flimsy piece of evidence? Denied. Challenge to the prosecution's entire premise? Shot down before Greer could finish his sentence. Langford barely even looked at Musk. It was like the verdict was already printed, signed, and waiting in his chambers. Then came the moment that sealed it. "We'd like to enter this into evidence," Greer said, holding up a document, one that proved a key witness had lied under oath. It directly contradicts the prosecution's claim. Forsyth didn't even flinch. He just sat there, watching. Langford barely looked at the paper. Denied. Irrelevant. Greer's jaw clenched. "Your Honor, this is critical exculpatory evidence." Langford folded his hands. "I said, denied." A heavy silence fell over the room. Even the jurors shifted uncomfortably in their seats. That was when Musk knew, without a doubt, that this wasn't a trial. It was a performance. A rigged game where the winner had been chosen long before he ever stepped into the courtroom. Forsyth smirked. Greer sat back, shaking his head. "Unreal," he muttered. Musk? He just smiled. It was that slow, knowing grin that sent entire industries into panic mode. He had seen a lot of things in his career, but this was interesting. He leaned toward Greer. "How much do you want to bet Langford has money coming in from somewhere very convenient?" Greer gave him a sharp look. "That's a hell of an accusation." Musk shrugged. "So let's find out if it's true." Chapter 2. The Web of Secrets. Caroline Levitt had made a name for herself exposing corporate corruption. But this was bigger than anything she had ever dealt with. As soon as she caught wind of the shady dealings in Musk's trial, she knew she had to dig deeper. And boy, did she dig. She sat in her cluttered apartment, poring over the case files with the kind of intensity that would make a seasoned detective proud. A half-empty cup of cold coffee sat on the desk, the only thing keeping her from burning through her keyboard with how fast she was typing. She was looking for something, anything, that would explain why a judge would be so blatantly biased. "Come on, Langford," she muttered under her breath, scrolling through public records. "You've got to have some skeletons." It didn't take long to find it. One of Langford's family trusts, something he'd managed to keep under wraps, had received massive deposits in recent months. Anonymous transfers. They were small enough to fly under the radar, but there was one thing that stuck out like a sore thumb. The money came from offshore accounts that couldn't be traced back to anyone clean. Levitt's eyes narrowed. This was the jackpot she was hoping for. But the real kicker? A few of the transactions were marked pending, and they had been made right around the same time Langford had been assigned to Musk's trial. She pulled up Langford's personal calendar, searching for any clues. It didn't take long before she found something else, a private retreat, held weeks before the trial. Langford, along with a few other high-profile figures, had attended. One of the attendees was none other than Malcolm Gates, a major competitor of Musk's, and someone who had a clear interest in seeing him knocked out of the picture. She leaned back in her chair, feeling the tension in her shoulders. This was no coincidence. Langford wasn't just biased, he was bought. But Levitt didn't just want a hunch. She needed hard proof. She pulled up the list of retreat attendees again, scanning it for any connections. There it was. One name stood out, Daniel Forsyth. The same prosecutor who had been throwing punches at Musk's defense every chance he got. "Of course," she muttered. "Forsyth's connected to this. No wonder he's so sure he's going to win." But Levitt's gut told her it wasn't enough to make a simple accusation. She needed more, something big, something public. And that's when she got the call. Caroline, the voice on the other end of the line was familiar, but shaky. "You need to see this." It was Mike, a former legal clerk from Langford's office. "What's going on?" she asked, her pulse quickening. I found something," Mike stammered. "Langford's not just taking money. He's in direct contact with a corporate lobbyist. They've been coordinating everything from trial outcomes to private meetings. It's all encrypted. But I've got the key." Levitt's heart skipped a beat. "You're sure?" "I'm sure," Mike replied. "This is bigger than I thought. You need to get this on record." Within hours, Levitt and Mike were deep into encrypted communications, tracking the emails and financial transfers that linked Langford directly to corporate interests. It was all there, the bribes, the meetings, the explicit instructions to swing the case in favor of Musk's rivals. Langford wasn't just making bad rulings, he was deliberately undermining Musk at every turn. She leaned back, staring at the screen. This isn't just about a judge. This is a full-on corporate hit. Her phone buzzed. A tip came through. She glanced at it and smirked. The story was getting juicier by the minute. "Looks like we're going live," she said to herself, fingers already flying over the keys. "It's time to bring this down." Chapter 3. Hacked and Exposed. Ethan Vaughn wasn't your average cybersecurity expert. In fact, calling him an expert was like calling a lion a cat. He was ruthless, methodical, and could crack a system faster than most people could say password 123. But even he was wary when Caroline Levitt dropped the latest bombshell in his lap. "Tell me this doesn't blow your mind," she said, dropping a stack of documents in front of him. "We've got Langford on the payroll. We've got Forsyth pulling strings. But there's more. They're communicating like a well-oiled machine, and we've got the logs to prove it." Vaughn glanced over the files, his eyes narrowing. "So we're talking wire transfers, encrypted messages, and a judge who's selling his soul for a paycheck?" Levitt nodded. "Exactly. But we need to make sure we've got the full picture. I need you to get into Langford's network, see if we can pull anything new from his comms." He cracked his knuckles, leaning back in his chair. "You sure about this? One wrong move, and we're toast. Do it. We're already in too deep to back out now." Vaughn didn't hesitate. His fingers flew over the keyboard with the practiced speed of someone who'd spent years hacking into places they weren't supposed to be. Lines of code zipped across the screen, navigating through firewalls and security protocols like a hot knife through butter. Minutes passed, and Levitt paced behind him. She could feel her heartbeat quicken. Every second that ticked by was another step closer to blowing this wide open. Then, out of nowhere, the screen flashed a warning. "Shit," Vaughn muttered, his eyes wide. "Someone's trying to track us." Levitt's heart dropped. "What do you mean?" "The system just went into overdrive," Vaughn said, his voice tight. "Whoever's on the other end of this is watching every move I make. We're not just looking at Langford anymore. We're looking at something bigger." She gritted her teeth. "How long until you can get us what we need?" Vaughn didn't answer. He was too focused, fingers dancing across the keys with an urgency that matched Levitt's rising panic. After a few more seconds of silence, he let out a breath of relief. "We're in," he said. "Now, let's see what kind of skeletons Langford's hiding in his closet." Levitt leaned over his shoulder, watching as the encrypted files began to decrypt. Her eyes scanned the screen as Vaughn pulled up a series of emails. They were addressed to corporate lobbyists, big players in the world of private investment and politics. She skimmed through them, heart pounding. There it was, a series of instructions, signed by Langford himself. "We need to ensure this case goes as planned," one of the emails read. "Musk must lose. If that means pushing the envelope on the judge's rulings, so be it. You'll be compensated accordingly." Levitt's fingers trembled as she grabbed her phone and snapped a screenshot. "This is it. This is the smoking gun." But just as she was about to take another screenshot, the screen flickered. "No, no, no, no," Vaughn muttered, his eyes darting around. "Someone's on us. They're shutting us down. Are we locked out?" Levitt demanded, her voice tight with panic. Vaughn's eyes flicked from the screen to her. "Not yet. But if they're trying to hack us, it means they know we're onto them. This just went from bad to really bad." She grabbed his shoulder, urgency in her voice. "Then do it now, before they pull the plug." Vaughn hit the final key, and a series of files began to download onto their secure drive. "Done. We've got the goods. But this isn't over. They know we're onto them. You need to go public, now." Levitt didn't hesitate. She grabbed the drive, throwing her coat on. "I'm going live. This ends tonight." But as she turned to leave, Vaughn stopped her. Caroline, be careful. If they can track us this fast, they'll come after you. She paused at the door, looking back over her shoulder with a cold smile. They don't scare me. Not anymore. And with that, she was gone, heading straight into the firestorm that was about to unfold. Chapter 4. The Tipping Point. Caroline Levitt had always been fearless, but standing in front of the camera, knowing the storm she was about to unleash, was something else entirely. She had the files. She had the proof. And now, it was time to bring the house of cards down. The lights in the studio were blinding, and the crew buzzed around her, preparing for the live broadcast. She could feel the weight of the moment. If she did this right, she could expose the whole corrupt system. If she messed it up, well, she wasn't thinking about that. Just breathe, her producer, Jenna, said, giving her a reassuring smile. You've got this. The world needs to know what's going on. Levitt nodded, trying to shake the nerves off. The countdown clock on the wall ticked down. In exactly 30 seconds, her face would be blasted across every screen in America. She turned to the files on her desk, glancing at the screenshots she'd taken of Langford's emails. The evidence was clear. The bribes. The coordination. Langford wasn't just taking money. He was being controlled by corporate interests. And it wasn't just him, it was Forsyth too. They'd both been puppets in a game that was designed to destroy Musk. And now, Levitt was about to show the world just how deep the route went. The studio lights flared, signaling that it was time. 3, 2, 1, we're live. Good evening. I'm Caroline Levitt, she said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline rushing through her veins. And tonight, I have a story that will shake you to your core. The camera zoomed in on her face. She could feel the weight of the audience, the anticipation hanging in the air. For weeks, billionaire Elon Musk has been battling accusations of fraud in a courtroom filled with bias and corruption, she continued. But what if I told you the entire trial was rigged from the start? What if I told you that the judge, Bernard Langford, and the prosecutor, Daniel Forsyth, were on the take? That's right. They were paid to make sure Musk lost, no matter what. She paused for a moment, letting the words sink in. There was no turning back now. Levitt pulled up the first email on the screen, showing a direct message from Langford to one of Musk's biggest competitors. The words on the screen made her heart pound. Ensure that Musk loses. If we have to bend the rules, so be it. You'll be compensated accordingly. She didn't wait for the audience's reaction. She went straight for the jugular. Here's the smoking gun, she said, her finger pointing at the screen. These aren't just shady deals. This is bribery. This is a setup. Langford was bought and paid for, and so was Forsyth. They weren't looking for justice. They were looking for a payday. Levitt could feel her pulse racing. She could hear the sound of the cameras, the whispers in the control room, but she was locked in. She wasn't about to let this slip away. The prosecution's case against Musk was based on lies, on falsified evidence, and on a judge who was paid to make sure Musk lost, she continued, the words pouring out of her like a dam that had just broken. This was never about justice. This was about protecting the interests of the powerful, the rich, the corporate giants who don't want Musk to disrupt their little game. She paused again, letting the weight of the accusation hang in the air. The room felt too quiet. The world was watching, and Levitt knew that the next few minutes would determine everything. The question is, who else is in on this? She asked, her voice suddenly cold. How deep does this go? Who's pulling the strings behind the scenes? Because I can tell you this much, this wasn't just a trial. This was a show, and they thought they could pull it off. But they forgot one thing. There are people out here who won't let this slide. Levitt leaned forward, staring straight into the camera. I'm not done. This is just the beginning. And trust me, we're about to uncover everything. The camera held for a beat, the silence heavy with anticipation. Then, just as the broadcast cut to a commercial, Levitt's phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, her eyes scanning the message. It was a simple text from Vaughn. They know. Get ready. Levitt's heart skipped a beat. She had just set the world on fire. Now, she had to make sure it didn't burn her down in the process. Chapter 5. The Backlash Begins. Caroline Levitt's phone buzzed incessantly after the live broadcast ended. The media storm had hit like a freight train, and she wasn't sure whether she was going to be the one flattened by it. She dropped a bomb, no doubt about it. But what came next was anyone's guess. She leaned against her desk, staring at the screen, watching the flood of notifications, news outlets, Twitter, angry legal teams. But there was one message that stood out among the rest. Caroline, we need to talk. It's about Langford. Call me. Now. It was from Mike, the former legal clerk who had helped her crack the case wide open. Her stomach churned. She had expected backlash from Langford's camp, maybe even some threats, but Mike's message had a different tone. Something wasn't right. She quickly dialed his number. "Mike, what's going on?" "I don't know how to say this," he said, his voice shaky. "But after you went live, things are changing. Langford's people are scrambling, Caroline. They've already started a full-scale counterattack." "Counterattack?" she echoed, her heart pounding. "What do you mean?" "They've got their own spin machine working overtime. The press is getting flooded with stories, dismissing everything you said as baseless accusations. They're calling you a liar, a witch hunt in disguise. And worst of all, they've got people in high places trying to bury the story." Levitt felt a cold wave of panic wash over her. This wasn't just a fight for the truth anymore. This was a war, and she was right in the middle of it. "Mike, we've got the evidence." "They can't erase that. They're just trying to cover it up," she snapped, trying to stay calm. "I won't back down." "You don't get it," Mike shot back. "They're going after you, Caroline. They're trying to destroy your credibility. You're not just some journalist anymore. You're the target." She swallowed hard, tension building in her chest. She had expected pushback, but not like this. If they were coming for her now, she had no choice but to double down. "I won't be silenced," she said, her voice low and steady. "I've got the goods. I'm not going to let them win this. I'll take it all the way, Mike." "We're not stopping." But as soon as she hung up, another text came through, this one from Vaughn. "Caroline, you need to move. They're tracking you. You've got hours, maybe less." Her heart skipped a beat. Vaughn wasn't one to send panic texts unless things were about to get real ugly. She paced the room, taking deep breaths to steady herself. This was it. She had made a choice, and now it was time to see it through. But just as she grabbed her jacket and headed out the door, her phone rang again. This time, it was a blocked number. She hesitated for only a second before answering. "Caroline," a low, gravelly voice said. "You've gone too far. This ends now." Her pulse raced. She recognized the voice immediately. It was Forsyth, the prosecutor who had been driving the case against Musk. He was the puppet master behind Langford's corruption, and now he was speaking directly to her. "You think this is over?" she shot back, her tone sharp and defiant. "You're not going to silence me. I've got proof. People know. They're watching." Forsyth chuckled darkly. "You're cute, Caroline, but you're in over your head. Langford's a small piece of this puzzle. If you want to keep going down this path, be prepared for what's coming. You won't be the first to get crushed by the system you're trying to expose." Her hand tightened around the phone. She wanted to throw it, but instead, she took a deep breath. "You don't scare me." "Maybe not," he replied, his voice dripping with venom. "But you should be scared. Things are about to get very messy for you. You've made enemies you'll never escape from." The call ended abruptly, and Levitt stood there in the middle of her living room, staring at her phone screen. It was clear now. This wasn't just a legal battle anymore. This was personal. She wasn't just fighting for the truth. She was fighting for her life. Chapter 6. The Ultimate Betrayal. Caroline Levitt's phone didn't stop buzzing. Each new notification felt like a strike, but the one that made her blood run cold wasn't from a reporter or a legal contact. It was from an unknown number. "Caroline, it's Mike. You need to listen." She answered immediately. "What's going on?" she demanded, her voice steady but with a hint of urgency. "Langford's people, they've got someone inside your team." The words hit her like a slap in the face. "What? Are you sure?" Mike's voice was tight, almost frantic. "I don't have all the details, but they're feeding info to the other side. They've been tracking your movements, Caroline. Someone's been leaking inside info about your investigation, who you're talking to, where you're going." A chill crawled up her spine. There was only one way they could have known everything, and it wasn't just through public sources. "Who?" she asked, barely above a whisper. "I can't say for sure, but the leak's coming from your own people. You've got a mole in your camp. Someone you trust is working against you." Caroline's heart pounded. Who could it be? She trusted her team, Mike, Vaughn, even Jenna. But trust was a fragile thing, and in a battle like this, the stakes were higher than ever. "I'm sending you something," Mike continued, cutting through her thoughts. "I hacked their system. The message they're sending is clear. If you don't back off, they'll make sure this ends for good. You'll be ruined." Caroline's mind raced. They weren't just threatening her career anymore. They were threatening her life. "Mike, listen to me. I'm not backing off. I'm too deep in this to turn around now." "You've got to be careful, Caroline," Mike urged. "You've got enemies who can make you disappear with a snap of their fingers. You don't know what you're dealing with." I'm dealing with the truth, she shot back. And they can't stop me from exposing it. She hung up without waiting for him to respond. It was time to get to the bottom of this. Whoever had betrayed her would pay. Caroline met with Vaughn later that day in a dimly lit cafe. He was scanning through the encrypted file she had sent over, his fingers scrolling furiously across his tablet. He looked up when she sat down, eyes narrowing. Mike's right, Vaughn said. Someone's feeding them information. The way they've been predicting our moves. This isn't just a coincidence. Caroline's jaw clenched. We need to find out who before they make their next move. Vaughn nodded. I've got something. Just found a pattern in the communications. Someone in your inner circle has been in touch with Langford's team. They've been leaking everything from your location to your next steps. It's all been mapped out. Caroline's mind raced. She thought back to the moments when she'd been most vulnerable, when she'd trusted the people around her with her plans, her suspicions, her every move. Who could it be? She muttered under her breath. Let's dig deeper, Vaughn said, but we don't have much time. They're closing in. It was then that Caroline's phone buzzed again. This time, it was an email from an anonymous source, a cryptic message. You're being watched. Back out before it's too late. There's a traitor in your camp. Her breath caught in her throat. This was getting worse, faster than she had imagined. She could feel the walls closing in, the pressure mounting. Whoever had betrayed her had made their move, and now they were gunning for her. She looked up at Vaughn. It's happening. They're going to try to make me disappear. Vaughn's eyes hardened. We'll stop them. We're not backing down, Caroline. Not now. Not ever. Caroline's pulse quickened. She was out of time. The traitor was closer than she thought, and whoever it was had the power to bring everything crashing down. But she wasn't going down without a fight. She stood up abruptly, throwing her coat over her shoulders. Let's finish this. We've got one chance to expose them all. As they walked out of the cafe into the cold night, Caroline couldn't shake the feeling that the end was coming, and that someone she trusted would soon reveal themselves as the ultimate betrayer. Chapter 7. The Fall of Langford. Caroline Levitt's gut twisted as she entered the courtroom the next morning. The atmosphere felt different today, tense, suffocating, like everyone in the room knew something was about to break. But she wasn't here just for the drama of it all. She was here to finish what she'd started, to destroy the carefully constructed house of cards that Langford and his cronies had built. The moment she stepped inside, her eyes found Judge Bernard Langford. He was sitting at the bench, acting like he hadn't just been exposed as a crook. He had his usual smug demeanor, but Caroline could see the cracks. She could sense the nervous energy coming off him in waves. But something wasn't right. There was a tension in the air, like everyone was waiting for something to explode. Caroline took her seat, trying to steady her nerves. She had what she needed to take Langford down. She had the proof that would turn the entire case on its head. Now it was time to strike. Across the room, Daniel Forsyth, the lead prosecutor, sat confidently, his face a mask of arrogance. His eyes met hers for a split second, and she could almost hear him thinking, I know what you did, but it's too late for you now. Caroline's phone buzzed under the table, and her heart skipped a beat. It was a message from Vaughn. We got him. Langford's connections are deeper than we thought. Hold tight. Her pulse quickened. This was it. The trial went on, but Caroline's mind wasn't in the room. She was already planning her next move. She was going to drop the bomb in front of everyone, live on air. But she had to be careful. Langford and Forsyth were smart. They would do anything to shut her down before she got the chance to expose them. Then came the moment. The judge raised his gavel, signaling the break in proceedings. The entire courtroom shifted, and Caroline saw her opening. She stood up, walking confidently toward the front of the room. She could feel the eyes of everyone on her, but she didn't flinch. This was her moment to expose the corruption, to bring the entire house of cards crashing down. She tapped the microphone, her voice echoing through the hushed room. I have something to say, she began, her words sharp, cutting through the tension. I've spent months digging into this case, and what I've uncovered is nothing short of disgusting. We've been lied to, manipulated, and betrayed by the very people who were supposed to uphold the law. The room was silent. Caroline could see Langford's face flush with anger, but he held it together. Forsyth's eyes narrowed. He knew what was coming, and it was only a matter of time before he tried to shut her down. But Caroline wasn't about to back down. Judge Langford, she continued, her voice steady and clear. You have been compromised. You've taken bribes. You've been working with corporate interests to rig this case from the start. I have the evidence to prove it. Bank transactions, secret meetings, and emails that link you directly to the prosecution. You've been paid to deliver this verdict before it even began. The courtroom erupted in chaos. Shouts filled the air, but Caroline didn't stop. "I know you thought you could get away with it," she said, turning to Langford, her gaze unwavering. "But you're done. Your corruption ends today." Langford's face twisted with rage, his composure slipping. "This is preposterous. You have no proof." But Caroline had the final piece, the emails that showed Langford's direct communication with the corporate lobbyists, the messages that tied him to the bribes. The entire system they'd built was about to come crashing down. "Actually," Caroline said with a cold smile, "I do have proof, and I'm going to make sure the whole world sees it." With a flick of her finger, she sent the emails to the screen at the front of the courtroom. The messages flashed on the screen, each one more damning than the last. The room went dead silent as everyone read the truth. Langford, Forsyth, and the entire prosecution team had been in bed with corporate giants the entire time. It was like watching a dam burst. Langford's arrogance crumbled in front of everyone, and Forsyth's smugness evaporated in an instant. They had no escape now. The judge tried to recover, but it was too late. Federal investigators were already entering the courtroom, and Langford's world came crashing down. The authorities moved quickly, placing Langford under immediate investigation for bribery and judicial misconduct. As Caroline stepped back, her heart still racing, she felt a wave of triumph wash over her. She had done it. She had taken down one of the most powerful players in the system, and there was no going back. But as the courtroom erupted in chaos, Caroline knew that this was only the beginning. The story wasn't over yet. There were still more enemies to expose, more corruption to tear apart. And this time, she wasn't stopping until every last one of them was brought to justice. Chapter 8. The Reckoning. The day after the courtroom explosion, Caroline couldn't shake the feeling that something even bigger was coming. Langford's fall had been the beginning, but there was no way in hell she was going to let this be the end. The corruption ran deeper than anyone could have imagined. Langford's ties to corporate sharks and crooked politicians were just the tip of the iceberg, and she was going after the whole damn thing. But she knew the next steps would be dangerous. Langford wasn't the only one who had been playing dirty. The whole judicial system, the prosecutors, even the politicians, they were all tangled in this web. And there was only one way to bring it all down. It was late at night when Caroline sat down in her apartment, the weight of everything pressing down on her. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Vaughn. "We've got more." Langford wasn't acting alone. "It's bigger than we thought." Her stomach churned. She already knew. It always was. The next morning, Caroline met with Vaughn in a small, dimly lit office. He'd been working nonstop, piecing together a trail of corruption that led all the way to the top. "All right, what's next?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Vaughn leaned in, tapping his fingers on the table. "I've been digging. Langford's not the only one in on it. The corruption runs deep, Caroline. I'm talking senators, CEOs, lobbyists. The money flows in ways we can't even trace yet. But one thing's clear, these people aren't just trying to win cases, they're trying to control the whole system." Caroline's mind raced. She thought of the documents, the emails, the secret meetings. "So, what do we do now?" "We go public. We expose it all," Vaughn said, his eyes dark with determination. "But we can't just throw it out there without proof. We need hard evidence. And the best way to get that? We go straight to the source." Caroline's heart skipped a beat. "You're talking about Forsyth, aren't you?" Vaughn nodded grimly. "He's been running the show behind the scenes. If we can get him to crack, it'll all fall apart." Forsyth was the lead prosecutor. He had been the face of the case against Musk, but Caroline now knew he was just another cog in the corrupt machine. Getting him to talk wasn't going to be easy. But Caroline was done playing by the rules. Later that evening, Caroline walked into a high-end bar downtown, her pulse racing. Forsyth had agreed to meet her there, under the guise of discussing a deal. But Caroline wasn't there to make deals. She was there to expose him. Forsyth was already sitting at the bar, swirling a drink in his hand, his cold eyes locked on Caroline as she approached. "Didn't think you'd actually show," he said, smirking. Caroline took a deep breath. "You're not as untouchable as you think." His smile faded. "Careful, Caroline. People like me don't get taken down by people like you." "You're wrong," she said, sitting down next to him, her voice low but firm. "You don't get it. You're not in control anymore. I've got all the evidence I need to take you down, Forsyth. And you can either help me bring down the whole system, or I'll make sure you go down with it." For a moment, Forsyth's expression hardened, and Caroline could see the panic start to creep in. He hadn't expected her to be so bold, so ruthless. He thought he had all the power, but it was slipping through his fingers. You think you can just walk in here and threaten me? Forsyth growled. You're playing with fire. Fire? You haven't seen anything yet, Caroline replied, leaning in closer. This is your last chance to save your skin. Help me bring down the others, or I'll expose everything. I've got the proof, Forsyth. Every dirty little secret you've been hiding. His eyes darted to the door as if weighing his options. Caroline knew he was close to cracking. He could run, but there was nowhere left to hide. I don't have a choice, do I? Forsyth finally muttered, his voice filled with bitterness. Caroline's lips curled into a small, victorious smile. No, you don't. It was over. Forsyth had just signed his own death sentence. The next few days were a whirlwind. Forsyth started cooperating, spilling everything he knew about the network of corruption stretching across the country. The truth hit like a tidal wave. Names of powerful senators, CEOs, and judges were exposed. Corporate giants that had pulled the strings behind closed doors were now in the spotlight. As the investigation gained momentum, the public outrage was palpable. Protests erupted in every major city. People were demanding accountability. And for the first time in a long time, it felt like the system was finally being held to account. But for Caroline, this wasn't about glory or headlines. It was about justice, about dismantling the corrupt empire that had been pulling the strings for too long. With Forsyth's confession, and the flood of evidence pouring in, the authorities began to take down the corrupt officials one by one. Langford's downfall was just the start. The real reckoning was unfolding before everyone's eyes. Caroline sat back in her office, her phone buzzing with notifications. But it wasn't the victory she felt. It was the realization that the fight wasn't over. The battle for justice was just beginning, and she'd be on the front lines, fighting every step of the way. The final blow, they thought they won. But the truth came for them. In the end, justice wasn't just served, it exploded. The system that had once seemed invincible crumbled under the weight of the truth. Langford, Forsyth, and the rest of the corrupt elite were brought down in one of the most shocking political scandals in recent history. But it wasn't just about exposing them. It was about giving power back to the people. The corporate titans who thought they could control everything? They were brought to their knees. The fallout was massive. Investigations, protests, a shift in the very fabric of the system. And the real kicker? It all started with one person, Caroline Levitt, willing to risk it all to expose the truth. But this story? It's far from over. There's more corruption lurking in the shadows, more lies waiting to be uncovered. Who's next? Only time will tell. Don't miss out. Hit that like button, smash the subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss the next explosive chapter in the fight for truth. You won't want to miss what's coming next.